The radio crackled. A small voice came through it. Just 3 words. "This is Falcon." 2 Navy pilots, flying 2 different jets, both froze at the same second. Because Falcon was a dead man's call sign. He had been gone for 2 years. And yet here it was, coming through the radio, calm and clear, like nothing had ever happened. Neither pilot knew yet that the voice belonged to an 11-year-old girl. Or that behind her, 148 people were sitting in a plane with no one flying it. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. That morning had started like the best day of Sadie Cole's life. She sat in the jump seat of the cockpit, right behind the 2 pilot chairs, headset over her ears, watching the runway lights disappear below as the big plane climbed into the clouds. She was 11 years old. She had blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, and this was the first time she had ever been allowed inside a real cockpit. It was a special day. Her grandfather, Captain Walter Cole, was flying his very last flight before retirement. 30 years with the airline, and this was the last one. The airline had given him permission to bring his granddaughter along, seated safely behind the controls, for the ride of a lifetime. Sadie had not said a full sentence out loud in 14 months. Not one word to her teacher. Not one word to her mom on the hard nights. When people asked her something, she nodded, or shook her head, or wrote it down on a small notepad she always kept in her jacket pocket. Everyone had learned to read her silence the way you learn to read the weather. A certain look meant yes. A certain stillness meant no. But up here, in the quiet hum of the cockpit, Sadie felt closer to her old self than she had in a long, long time. "You've got good eyes, kid," Walter said, glancing back at her with a smile. "Just like your dad." Sadie smiled back. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew what she was thinking. Beside him, the first officer, a younger man named David Ruiz, ran through the climb checklist out loud, calm and routine, the way pilots do 100 times a week. Nobody on that flight deck had any idea that somewhere behind a panel near their feet, a small crack in an oxygen line had already started to leak. It was so small that no warning light had caught it yet. But it was growing. And in 11 minutes, it would take away every adult on that flight deck at the exact same time. The cabin was still calm. Flight attendants moved down the aisle with drink carts. Passengers read books, watched movies, dozed with their heads against the windows. 148 people, all trusting that somebody up front was watching over them. At 35,000 feet, the leak finally won. The cockpit oxygen system, the one built to protect the pilots in exactly this kind of emergency, failed at the worst possible second. Captain Cole felt it first, a strange fogginess creeping into his head, like trying to think through a thick blanket. He reached for his mask. It didn't deploy. "David," he said, his voice already slower than normal. "Something's wrong. I feel." He never finished the sentence. His hand slid off the controls. His head dropped forward. First Officer Ruiz turned to check on him, and within seconds, the same fog hit him too. His vision blurred. His hands went numb. He slumped sideways in his seat, unconscious, just like the captain beside him. Sadie's own oxygen came from a separate line, built into the observer's jump seat, a backup system that had not failed. It was the only reason she was still awake at all. She stared at the 2 grown men in front of her, both slumped over, both completely still. For one long second, Sadie could not breathe. It was the same frozen feeling she remembered from the day 2 officers in uniform had come to her front door. The day her whole world had gone silent. The plane, with no hands on the controls, began a slow, gentle roll to the left. The nose started to dip. Somewhere behind her, 148 people had no idea their plane had just lost both pilots at once. But something else took over inside Sadie. Something that had been building for 2 years, one quiet Saturday morning at a time. She unbuckled, leaned forward between the two seats, and grabbed the controls with both hands. "Wings level," she whispered. Her voice was rusty, barely a whisper. It was the first thing she had said out loud in 14 months. "Nose up. Fly the plane, Sadie." Her hands shook. But they moved the way they had moved 100 times before, on a machine her father built for her with his own hands, in a garage 300 miles away. The plane stopped rolling. It leveled out. Sadie Cole, 11 years old, was now the only person flying an airplane full of sleeping strangers. And she had no idea for how long she could keep it that way. At Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, 2 fighter jets were already in the air on a training flight when the call came through. "All aircraft, be advised, we have an emergency. Commercial flight, 148 souls on board, has stopped responding to air traffic control. Aircraft has begun an unexplained descent." Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reyes, call sign Ghost, and Lieutenant Priya Anand, call sign Havoc, turned their jets toward the coordinates without a second thought. "That's a lot of people on one plane," Havoc said, pushing her throttle forward. "What happened to the crew?" "Unknown," the controller answered. "The descent leveled off a minute ago, on its own. We don't know who, or what, is flying that aircraft right now." 9 minutes later, both jets pulled up beside the massive airliner, one on each wing, the small fighters looking almost like toys next to the wide fuselage. Reyes eased closer and looked through the cockpit glass. What he saw made his stomach drop. 2 grown men, slumped forward in their seats, not moving. And behind them, leaning between the seats, both small hands wrapped around the controls, was a child. Maybe 11 years old. "Command, this is Ghost," Reyes said, keeping his voice steady even though his hands were not. "I have visual on the flight deck. Both pilots appear unconscious. There is a child at the controls. I repeat, a child is flying this aircraft, with 148 people on board." There was a long, stunned pause on the radio. "Ghost, try to make contact," the controller finally said. Reyes switched to the emergency guard channel, the one every pilot in the sky listens to, and spoke slow and gentle, the way you would speak to someone standing at the edge of something dangerous. "Aircraft ahead, this is a Navy jet flying beside you. Can you hear me?" Static. Then, a small, shaking voice. "I hear you," Sadie said. "This is Falcon. Both pilots are not moving. I need help. There are a lot of people back there." Reyes and Havoc froze at the exact same second, in 2 different jets, hundreds of feet apart. Because there was no reason at all, for a child to know that word. To use it. To say it like it belonged to her. "Say that call sign again," Reyes said, his voice cracking just slightly. "Falcon," Sadie said. "My dad taught me. Commander Daniel Cole. That was his name. That was his call sign." Havoc's breath caught over the radio. "Ghost. That's him. That's Commander Cole's call sign. I trained with guys who flew under him." Reyes felt something twist hard in his chest. He had met Daniel Cole once, years ago, before a training accident off the coast took one of the best pilots the Navy had ever had. He remembered the funeral. He remembered a small girl standing there in a black dress, not crying, just staring straight ahead like she was somewhere far away. That girl was now alone at the controls of an airliner full of strangers, using her dead father's call sign because it was the only voice she had left. "Falcon, this is Ghost," Reyes said, forcing calm into every word. "My name is Marcus. I flew with your dad. He was one of the best pilots I ever knew. And right now, I need you to be just as good as he was. Can you do that?" A pause. Then, quiet but firm, "Yes." "Okay, Falcon, talk to me," Reyes said. "What do you see in front of you? Start with your altitude." Sadie's eyes moved across the panel the same way they did every Saturday morning, back home, on the machine her father had built for her. It says 31,000 feet. There's a light that keeps flashing. It says something about cabin pressure. That matches what happened to your pilots, Reyes said carefully. We think there was an oxygen problem up front. Is there a switch marked autopilot anywhere near you? Sadie scanned the panel. I think I see it. It has a button that says AP. Press it. It should hold the plane steady so your arms can rest. Sadie pressed it. The controls went stiff under her hands as the plane leveled out on its own. Relief rushed through her whole body, so strong her knees nearly buckled. It's holding, she said, her voice shaking now, but steady underneath. You just did something most grown adults would panic trying to figure out, Reyes said. Now, the two pilots. Are they breathing? Sadie leaned over, checking. Yes. Both of them. Slow, but they're breathing. That's the best news we could get, Reyes said. It means the oxygen problem probably knocked them out, but didn't stop their hearts. If we get this plane lower, to air they can actually breathe, they might wake up on their own. How much lower? Sadie asked. About 10,000 feet lower, Reyes said. I'm going to walk you through starting a slow descent. Nothing fast. Nothing sharp. Just easy and steady. Behind Sadie, unseen, 148 passengers still had no idea anything was wrong. The flight attendants had noticed the strange quiet from the flight deck and were already knocking, worried, on the locked cockpit door. But there was nothing they could do from the other side of it. Everything now depended on one 11-year-old girl and two voices on the radio. The descent took nearly 6 minutes, the longest 6 minutes of Sadie's life. Ease the nose down, just slightly, Reyes said. Watch your speed. Don't let it build too fast. Sadie's hands moved with a steadiness that surprised even her. Slowly, the altimeter numbers ticked downward. 29,000 feet. 26,000. 22,000. At 18,000 feet, something happened that made Sadie's heart jump into her throat. Her grandfather groaned. Grandpa, she said, forgetting the radio entirely, twisting toward him. Captain Cole's eyes fluttered open, confused, his head heavy. He blinked slowly at the controls in front of him, then at his granddaughter's small hand still gripping the yoke. Sadie, he said, his voice thick and slurred. What? Grandpa, you passed out. So did the other pilot. I've been flying the plane. There are 2 Navy jets helping me. For a moment, Walter Cole simply stared at her, his mind still catching up to a world that had changed completely while he was unconscious. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached for the controls himself. Ghost, this is, his voice cracked with static and confusion, this is the captain. I'm awake. I have the aircraft. Relief flooded through Reyes's chest so fast it nearly stole his breath. Copy that, Captain. Good to hear your voice. Your granddaughter just kept this whole airplane in the sky for 6 minutes. She's the reason you and your first officer are still breathing right now. Walter turned in his seat and looked at Sadie, his eyes shining. You flew the plane. Sadie nodded, then, remembering she had a voice now, said it out loud instead. I had to. You weren't moving. First Officer Ruiz stirred a moment later, groggy but conscious, oxygen mask finally working now that the cabin pressure fault had eased at the lower altitude. Within minutes, both pilots were alert enough to take back full control, running emergency checklists, informing the cabin crew, preparing the frightened but unharmed passengers for an emergency landing. But even with both pilots awake, Reyes and Havoc did not leave. They flew escort the entire way down, watching over the big plane like it was one of their own squadron mates, all the way to the runway at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, where fire trucks and ambulances lined the tarmac in case anything else went wrong. Nothing did. The landing was smooth. 148 passengers stepped off that plane never knowing how close they had come to disaster, or that the reason they were walking off it at all was an 11-year-old girl who had not spoken a full sentence in over a year. Paramedics checked both pilots on the tarmac. Aside from the lingering grogginess of oxygen deprivation, both would make a full recovery. Doctors later confirmed a faulty valve in the cockpit oxygen system, an extremely rare failure, one that investigators would spend months studying to make sure it never happened again. Sadie was checked over too, wrapped in a blanket despite telling everyone she wasn't cold. She stood on the tarmac and watched two Navy jets circle low overhead before dipping their wings, once, and turning away toward home. It was Reyes and Havoc who found her 20 minutes later, still in their flight suits, having landed and driven straight over from base. Reyes knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Hey there, Falcon," he said softly. Sadie looked up at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, a full sentence, out loud, to a stranger, for the first time in 14 months. "You knew my dad." "I did," Reyes said, his throat tight. "He was the best pilot I ever flew with. And what you did today wasn't luck. That was you. He would be so proud of you right now, he wouldn't even have the words for it. And trust me, that man always had words." Havoc knelt down on Sadie's other side. "You just kept 148 people alive today. I don't think I could have done that at 11. I'm not totally sure I could do it now." Sadie let out a small laugh, wiping her eyes with the edge of the blanket. "My dad used to call me Falcon too. Nobody else knew that. Not even my mom." "We know now," Reyes said. "And in our book, that name still means something. It always will." Sadie's mother arrived an hour later, having driven and run through the airport in a blur of fear and prayer, only to find her daughter sitting calmly on the back of an ambulance, sipping hot chocolate, talking quietly with two Navy pilots who looked, somehow, like they had known her for years. The airline gave Captain Walter Cole an early, honorary send-off dinner 2 weeks later, in front of the entire flight crew, thanking him for 30 years of service. But every single person in that room knew the real hero of his final flight had been sitting in the jump seat behind him. Sadie never went back to full silence after that day. It didn't happen all at once. Grief doesn't work that way. But something had cracked open on that flight deck, something that let light back into a part of her that had been shut for 2 years. She still missed her father every single day. But now, when people asked about him, she found she had words. A year later, Reyes and Havoc stood in dress uniform at a small local airport, watching 12-year-old Sadie Cole take her very first real flying lesson in a small training plane. Her grandfather sat in the row behind her, fully retired now, grinning like a man who had been given a second chance at everything that mattered. Her flight instructor asked, half joking, what she wanted her call sign to be. Sadie didn't hesitate. "Falcon," she said. "It's already mine." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder. Even the smallest voice, when it finally speaks, can steady the whole sky.